There is a type of fat sitting deep inside your abdomen right now, and most people have no idea it is there. It does not jiggle. You cannot grab it. And that is exactly what makes it so dangerous. I am Dr. Daniel Ashford, and today I am going to walk you through 6 proven methods to reduce this hidden visceral fat, the kind that coats your liver, wraps around your intestines, and crowds your pancreas. So if you are over 40, stay with me through this entire conversation. It could change the trajectory of your health for the rest of your life. Here is why this matters more than most people realize. In the United States alone, roughly 7 out of every 10 adults carry more weight than their frame was built to handle, and the majority of those individuals store a significant portion of that excess deep in the abdominal cavity. Not under the skin where you can see it, underneath the muscle wall where it quietly fuels chronic disease. That is visceral fat, and it is directly tied to insulin resistance, cardiovascular events, type 2 diabetes, and a growing list of cancers. These are not scare tactics. These are decades of published clinical data. But here's what I really want you to hear. This fat responds to specific strategies. It can be reduced. And every method I am about to share with you targets the exact mechanisms that make visceral fat so stubborn. So let us get into how this fat actually works, and then straight into the 6 methods. First, you need to understand what makes visceral fat behave differently from the fat you can pinch on your arm or your thigh. That pinchable fat is called subcutaneous fat. It is mostly a storage depot. Visceral fat is something else entirely. Think of it as an active gland. It does not just sit there, it produces chemical signals. Specifically, it pumps out inflammatory molecules called cytokines. These cytokines travel through your bloodstream and create low-grade inflammation in virtually every organ system. That is the bridge between belly fat and heart attacks. That is the bridge between belly fat and blood sugar problems. The fat itself is broadcasting a distress signal throughout your entire body, every hour of every day. Now here is another wrinkle that does not get discussed enough. Visceral fat has a weaker blood supply than subcutaneous fat. That matters because when you exercise and your metabolism ramps up, your blood carries signals to fat cells telling them to release stored energy. If the blood supply to those deep fat cells is limited, they are harder to mobilize. So regular moderate exercise alone often falls short. You need more targeted approaches, and I will show you exactly what those are. There is a third factor. Visceral fat is loaded with receptors for cortisol, your primary stress hormone. When cortisol is chronically elevated, those receptors light up and signal the body to hold onto deep abdominal fat. This was probably useful thousands of years ago when stress meant a famine was coming and your body needed emergency fuel reserves near the organs. But in 2026, when stress means deadlines and poor sleep and financial pressure, that ancient wiring works against you. And one more thing that catches people off guard. You do not have to look overweight to carry dangerous levels of visceral fat. Shane clinicians sometimes call this pattern metabolically obese, normal weight. I've seen individuals who appear slender by any visual measure walk into a clinic, get a body composition scan, and discover alarming amounts of deep abdominal fat. Sedentary lifestyles, chronic stress, and poor dietary patterns can build visceral stores even in someone who fits into slim clothing. So this is not about how you look. It is about what is happening on the inside. Good news is, every strategy I am about to share targets these specific mechanisms. Let us get into it. The first strategy is anchoring your meals around protein, not just eating a little extra chicken at dinner. I mean structuring every meal so that protein is the foundation, with a target of at least 100 grams spread across the day. The clinical literature on this is remarkably consistent. A research trial specifically examining protein intake and abdominal fat distribution found that participants consuming roughly 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight lost significantly more deep abdominal fat than those eating standard amounts. For a 180-pound person, that comes out to around 120 grams daily. For someone closer to 140 pounds, roughly 95 grams is a solid target. Why does protein have this effect? 3 reasons. First, it has the highest thermic effect of any macronutrient, meaning your body burns more calories simply digesting it. Roughly 20 to 30% of protein calories are spent on digestion alone, compared to only 5 to 10% for carbohydrates. Second, it preserves lean muscle tissue, which keeps your resting metabolic rate from declining as you lose weight. Third, It blunts appetite hormones more effectively than fat or carbohydrate, so you naturally consume less without feeling deprived. Practically, this means your morning meal needs to carry serious weight. Aim for 35 to 50 grams right at the start. 3 eggs paired with 4 ounces of turkey or smoked salmon gets you above 45 grams before you have even left the kitchen, or blend a generous scoop of protein powder with some ground flax, a handful of walnuts, and unsweetened almond milk, and you are north of 40 grams in a glass. Repeat that kind of intention at lunch and dinner, and hitting your daily target becomes routine rather than a struggle. If this single strategy is the only change you make, you will still notice a difference within weeks. That is how powerful protein is for reshaping body composition from the inside out. Now, the second strategy pairs beautifully with the first, and it involves narrowing the window during which you consume food each day. You have likely heard of time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting. The research here is strong and getting stronger every year. A controlled study conducted over 12 weeks found that participants who simply compressed all of their meals into an 8-hour window lost 4% of their visceral fat stores. No calorie counting, no special diet. They just stopped eating by early evening and pushed their first meal to mid-morning. The researchers measured this with imaging, not bathroom scales. So we know the change happened specifically in the deep abdominal compartment. What is driving that result? When you extend the overnight fast, insulin levels stay low for a longer stretch. And low insulin is the metabolic environment where your body can actually access stored fat for fuel. Visceral fat, despite its stubborn blood supply, becomes more available when insulin is suppressed for extended periods. Think of insulin as a lock on your fat cells. The longer that lock stays open, the more stored energy can flow out. For daily practice, an eating window of roughly 10 in the morning to 6 in the evening works well for most people. But I also want you to consider periodic longer fasts. A study published in the journal Obesity reported that participants who completed a full 24-hour fast twice per week reduced visceral fat by 7% in just 4 weeks. That is a meaningful clinical reduction in 1 month. A 24-hour fast is simpler than it sounds. You eat dinner one evening, skip all meals the next day, and resume with dinner the following evening. During the fasted stretch, water, plain black coffee, and unsweetened herbal teas are your companions. Here's a practical insight that accelerates the process. If you keep your carbohydrate intake lower the day before a longer fast, your body depletes its glycogen stores faster. Glycogen is essentially stored sugar in your muscles and liver. Once those tanks empty, your metabolism shifts more completely into fat burning. And pair a lower carbohydrate day with some strength training, and you enter that deeper metabolic state even sooner when the fast begins. That is a meaningful edge. But please hear me on this. If you have blood sugar regulation issues, if you take medication for diabetes, or if you have a history of disordered eating, talk to your physician before attempting extended fasts. This is powerful medicine, and powerful medicine requires respect. Strategy 3 is about the kind of movement that actually reaches visceral fat. And here is where a lot of well-meaning advice falls short. Walking is wonderful. Daily movement matters, but research consistently shows that high-intensity interval training, often shortened to HIIT, is significantly more effective at mobilizing deep abdominal fat than steady-state cardio performed at a moderate pace. Why? Because high-intensity bursts trigger a surge of catecholamines, hormones like adrenaline and noradrenaline. These hormones bind to receptors on visceral fat cells and signal them to release stored energy. Remember, visceral fat has abundant receptors for stress hormones. During a controlled, short burst of intense exercise, you are actually using that receptor density to your advantage. The protocol that appears most frequently in the clinical data is straightforward. 30 seconds of all-out effort, an exercise like cycling, bodyweight squats, or even fast walking on an incline, followed by 60 to 90 seconds of easy recovery. Repeat that cycle for 15 to 20 minutes, and you have completed a session that research shows is effective when performed 2 to 3 times per week. A study examining this exact format over a 12-week period found significant reductions in visceral fat measured by DEXA scanning, with participants exercising less than 60 minutes per week total. Let that settle in. Under 1 hour per week of the right kind of exercise produced measurable reductions in the most dangerous type of body fat. You do not need to live in a gym. You need focused, intentional bursts, and every one of these sessions can be modified for joint safety. If sprinting is not appropriate for your knees, a recumbent bike works. If squats are too much, chair-assisted movements work. The intensity is relative to your capacity. What matters is that brief window where your heart rate climbs and your body floods with those mobilizing hormones. Pair this with 2 sessions of resistance training each week, even 20 to 30 minutes per session, and you are building the metabolic engine that keeps visceral fat from returning. Muscle tissue burns calories at rest. The more you carry, the higher your baseline metabolic rate. That combination of interval training and strength work is the most researched exercise prescription for visceral fat reduction available right now. If you are finding value in what we have covered so far, do me a quick favor and tap that like button. It pushes this conversation in front of more people who need to hear it. I genuinely appreciate that. Now, strategy 4 is one that most fat loss discussions ignore entirely, and it involves the trillions of microorganisms living inside your digestive tract. Your gut microbiome has a direct relationship with visceral fat accumulation, and the modern diet is sabotaging that relationship at every turn. Ultra-processed foods, artificial sweeteners, and produce treated with certain pesticides all disrupt the delicate balance of bacteria in your intestines. A landmark study published in Nature demonstrated that artificial sweeteners alone altered gut microbial composition and increased markers of glucose intolerance by 30% within just 7 days. That means your body handles sugar worse, your pancreas works harder, insulin stays elevated, and fat storage, particularly visceral fat storage, accelerates, all from a substance marketed as a healthy alternative to sugar. Glyphosate, the active ingredient in the most widely used herbicide on the planet, has also been shown to disrupt beneficial gut bacteria while allowing harmful strains to flourish. When harmful bacteria dominate, they produce compounds called lipopolysaccharides that breach the gut lining and trigger systemic immune responses. That immune activation drives inflammation. And inflammation, as we discussed, is the language visceral fat speaks fluently. The good news is that restoring microbial balance does not require expensive supplements, though those can help in acute situations. What it requires is a daily source of beneficial bacteria. Fermented foods are the most reliable delivery system. Kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, traditional fermented pickles, miso. Pick 1 or 2 that you actually enjoy and incorporate them into your meals every day. A clinical trial examining daily probiotic intake found that participants consuming specific strains of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium at a dose of 10 billion colony-forming units showed measurable reductions in visceral fat over a 12-week period. I want to add something from my own clinical observations. Pay close attention to which foods trigger bloating, brain fog, or digestive discomfort in your body. Not everyone reacts the same way. Wheat bothers some people severely, while others handle it without any issue. Dairy devastates certain digestive systems and barely registers in others. Those individual trigger foods are quietly driving inflammation that feeds visceral fat. Identify them, reduce them, replace them with options your body actually processes well. That personalized awareness, combined with daily fermented foods, creates a gut environment that actively works against deep fat accumulation instead of promoting it. Strategy 5 is about what happens when you are not exercising and not eating. It is about sleep and stress, the 2 factors that directly control cortisol output, and therefore directly control how aggressively your body clings to visceral fat. I mentioned earlier that visceral fat cells are dense with cortisol receptors. When you sleep poorly, cortisol rises. When you carry chronic stress, cortisol stays elevated. And when cortisol stays elevated, those deep fat cells receive a constant biochemical instruction to expand and hold. A meta-analysis published in the journal Sleep reviewed data from over 50,000 participants and found that adults sleeping fewer than 6 hours per night had significantly higher visceral fat measurements than those consistently getting 7 to 8 hours. The relationship was linear. Less sleep, more visceral fat. More sleep, less visceral fat. On the practical side, consistent sleep timing matters more than total hours. Going to bed and waking at roughly the same time every day, including weekends, stabilizes your circadian cortisol rhythm. Reducing artificial light exposure after sundown helps your brain produce melatonin on schedule. And keeping your bedroom cooler, which connects to our next strategy, improves sleep depth. But sleep alone is not enough if your waking hours are saturated with unmanaged stress. This is where a deliberate daily practice makes the difference. I am not talking about anything elaborate. 2 minutes of seated breathing at the start of your morning, 2 minutes of the same before bed. Anchor it to a specific location if you can, a particular chair, a particular corner of the room. When the location becomes the trigger, the habit sticks. In the morning, those 2 minutes set a parasympathetic tone that carries into the first hours of your day. In the evening, they clear accumulated tension so cortisol drops before you close your eyes. This is not soft advice. This is endocrine management. You are directly regulating the hormonal pathway that tells visceral fat to grow or shrink. And now our sixth and final strategy, and this one surprises a lot of people. Cold exposure, not necessarily a polar plunge, not necessarily anything dramatic, but deliberate, regular exposure to cooler temperatures activates a type of tissue in your body called brown adipose tissue. Brown fat is rich in mitochondria, the energy-producing structures inside your cells, and its primary function is to generate heat. When you are exposed to cold brown fat ramps up, pulls energy from your bloodstream, and burns it to maintain your core temperature. Multiple studies have shown that regular cold exposure increases brown fat activity and correlates with reductions in overall body fat, including visceral stores. A study conducted at the National Institutes of Health found that sleeping in a room cooled to around 66 degrees Fahrenheit for just 4 weeks increased participants' brown fat volume by 42% and improved their insulin sensitivity. You do not need to buy an ice bath to benefit from this. Start with your sleeping environment. Lower the thermostat. Use a thinner blanket. Open a window if the season allows it. If you take daily showers, finish the last 30 to 60 seconds with cold water. It will be uncomfortable at first. Within a week or two, your body adapts, and the discomfort fades considerably. If you do have access to a cold plunge or cold body of water, even 2 to 3 minutes, a few times per week, provides additional metabolic benefit. The key is consistency, not intensity. So there are your 6 strategies. High-protein meals anchoring every part of your day. Time-restricted eating and periodic longer fasts to keep insulin low and fat mobilization high. High-intensity interval training paired with resistance work. A gut restoration protocol built on fermented foods and the removal of inflammatory triggers. Prioritize sleep and a daily stress regulation practice, and regular cold exposure to activate your brown fat. Now here is the overlooked factor I promised you at the beginning. None of these strategies produce lasting results without consistency. Not perfection. Consistency. The person who follows 4 of these 6 methods every single week for 6 months will be in a profoundly different metabolic position than the person who does all 6 perfectly for 2 weeks and then stops. Small, repeated actions compound. They rewire hormonal patterns. They rebuild microbial balance. They retrain your nervous system. Do not let the pursuit of a perfect plan prevent you from starting an imperfect one tonight. If I were standing in your kitchen right now, I would tell you to do one thing before bed. Pick the strategy that felt most doable while you were listening. Just one. Commit to it for the next 30 days. Write it down. Put it on your refrigerator. And in the comments below this video, tell me which one you chose. Type the number 1 through 6. I read those comments, and I want to know where you are starting. If this conversation gave you something useful, share it with someone in your life who is dealing with stubborn belly fat or rising blood sugar or just feeling stuck. Sometimes the right information at the right time is all it takes to shift someone's trajectory. Hit subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into the science that actually matters for people over 40. I am Dr. Daniel Ashford. Take care of yourselves. I will talk to you very soon.